The crack of the gavel echoed through the crowded courtroom, silencing the murmurs that had filled the stuffy space all morning. Helena Zachary stood at the defendant's table, her slender fingers gripping the wooden edge so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The year was 1876, and in the small town of Willow Creek, Colorado, justice was often swift and merciless. Helena's eyes, wide with fear, darted around the packed room, searching for a friendly face among the sea of stern expressions. The charges against her were serious theft of a valuable brooch from the mayor's wife, a crime she hadn't committed, but one that could send her to prison for years. Helena had been working as a seamstress for Mrs. Montgomery when the piece went missing. Being new in town and without family, she made an easy target for accusation. "Order in the court!" Judge Patterson bellowed, his weathered face set in stone beneath his white wig. "We will now hear final statements before the jury deliberates." Helena's court-appointed lawyer, a nervous young man barely older than her 22 years, shuffled his papers and cleared his throat. His defense had been weak at best, seeming more concerned with not offending the mayor than defending his client. The prosecutor, a sharp-tongued man with cold eyes, rose to deliver his final blow. "Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is clear. This woman, this outsider, took advantage of the Montgomerys' generosity and stole a family heirloom worth more than she could earn in 5 years. Justice demands." The heavy courtroom doors crashed open, cutting off his words. Every head turned as boot heels struck the wooden floor with deliberate, unhurried steps. Samuel Nash stood 6 feet tall in his worn leather boots, trail dust still clinging to his denim pants and blue cotton shirt. His tan Stetson was pushed back on his head, revealing piercing blue eyes that took in the scene with a calculating gaze. A star-shaped badge glinted on his chest, not from this county, but from Silverstone, the neighboring territory. "What is the meaning of this interruption?" Judge Patterson demanded, his gavel poised to strike again. Samuel strode forward, ignoring the whispers that followed him. His eyes met Helena's for a brief moment, and she felt a strange flutter in her chest, despite her terror. "Your Honor," Samuel said, his voice deep and steady, "I have evidence pertaining to this case that needs to be heard." "The time for evidence has passed, Marshal. We're about to send this to the jury." Samuel stood his ground. "Then you'd be sending an innocent woman to prison." His gaze swept the courtroom before landing on Helena again. She stood shaking in the courtroom, her honey-colored hair falling loose from its pins, her green eyes swimming with unshed tears. "The real thief was apprehended in Silverstone yesterday," Samuel continued, pulling a small velvet pouch from his pocket, "along with this brooch and several other stolen items." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. Mrs. Montgomery surged to her feet. Samuel's voice cut through the commotion. "Her place is with me, Your Honor, under the protection of the Silverstone Marshal's office, where she can identify the man we caught and give testimony." Helena's breath caught in her throat. This stranger, this marshal, was offering her salvation. Judge Patterson's eyes narrowed. "And who exactly is this thief you claim to have caught?" "Thomas Reed, Your Honor, a known confidence man who's been working his way through the Colorado territories. He was posing as a traveling salesman when he came through here." Helena remembered the man charming and well-dressed. He had visited the Montgomery home while she was fitting Mrs. Montgomery for a new dress. He had complimented her stitching, making her blush with his attention. The prosecutor sputtered. "This is highly irregular. We can't just—" "Can you prove it was this Reed character?" the judge interrupted. Samuel approached the bench and handed over a folded paper. "Sworn statements from 3 other victims who've identified both him and their stolen property. And this." He reached into his pocket again and produced a small sketch, a perfect likeness of the brooch that had been described in the court. "The real brooch is being held as evidence in Silverstone, but Mrs. Montgomery is welcome to come identify it." Samuel turned to face the wealthy woman. "Madam, did you notice a small chip on the underside of the setting? Almost invisible unless you know to look for it?" Mrs. Montgomery's hand flew to her mouth. Yes, there was. William gave it to me on our 10th anniversary, and it happened when I dropped it that same night. No one else could have known that." The courtroom erupted in chatter. Judge Patterson banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order! I will have order." When silence finally fell, he fixed Samuel with a stern look. Marshal Nash, you're asking me to release Miss Zachary into your custody? Yes, Your Honor. She's a material witness now. Her testimony on Reed's presence in the Montgomery home could help convict him on all charges. Samuel's eyes found Helena again, and this time his expression softened slightly. She'll be safe with me. Helena could scarcely breathe. Minutes ago, her future had looked bleak: prison, disgrace, a ruined reputation. Now this stranger was offering her a chance at freedom, at clearing her name. Judge Patterson deliberated for a long moment, then nodded curtly. Very well. Case dismissed. Miss Zachary, you are released into Marshal Nash's custody. This court is adjourned. The gavel struck one final time. The courtroom began to empty. Curious onlookers lingering to gossip about the dramatic turn of events. Helena remained frozen in place until Samuel approached her table. Miss Zachary, he said quietly, we should leave while the good people of Willow Creek are still digesting what just happened. Helena found her voice at last. How did you know? About the brooch? About me? A ghost of a smile touched his lips. That's a story for the trail. Can you ride? Yes, but I have nothing with me except these clothes. Samuel nodded toward the door. We'll get what you need. My horse is outside, and we've got a long ride ahead of us. As they moved toward the exit, Helena felt the stares of the townspeople who had been so quick to condemn her. Her former employer, Mrs. Montgomery, approached, looking contrite. Helena, I should have known you wouldn't... She trailed off, then tried again. Your things are still at our home. I'll have them sent to you. Helena managed a stiff nod, unable to forgive so easily. Outside, the bright Colorado sun momentarily blinded her. When her vision cleared, she saw a magnificent Palomino stallion hitched to the post. Samuel checked the saddle and then turned to her. We'll stop at the general store for supplies before we head out. Is there anything specific you need? Helena thought of her meager possessions. Just some basic necessities. I don't have much money. The marshal's office will cover it, he interrupted. Consider it part of your witness protection. As they walked toward the store, Helena studied her rescuer from the corner of her eye. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to danger. His hand never straying far from the holstered Colt at his hip. Yet there was something in the way he'd spoken to her, a gentleness that belied his rough exterior. Why did you really come for me, Marshal Nash? She asked suddenly. There must be other witnesses who saw that salesman. Samuel stopped walking and turned to face her fully. Because no one else was about to hang for a crime they didn't commit. And because I believe in justice, Miss Zachary. Even in the wild country, maybe especially here, justice matters. For the first time since her arrest 2 weeks ago, Helena felt the tightness in her chest begin to ease. Whatever lay ahead on the trail to Silverstone, at least she was free, and something in Marshal Nash's steady gaze told her she could trust him to keep her safe. What she couldn't have known then was how completely their lives would intertwine in the days ahead, or how the long journey to Silverstone would be only the beginning of their story. The general store was mercifully empty when they entered, the shopkeeper raising his eyebrows at the sight of Helena with the marshal. Need to outfit the lady for travel, Mr. Finch, Samuel said, his tone businesslike. Put it on the Silverstone marshal's account. While Helena selected the bare essentials, a change of clothes, a hairbrush, soap, and a warm shawl for the cool mountain nights, Samuel added other items she hadn't considered, a canteen, leather gloves, a small knife in a sheath. Have you ever been to Silverstone, Miss Zachary? He asked, as the shopkeeper wrapped their purchases. Helena shook her head. I've never been farther west than Denver before coming to Willow Creek 2 months ago. It's smaller than this place, but decent folk. You'll be staying at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house while you're there. He hesitated, then added, It might be a few weeks before the circuit judge arrives for Reed's trial. A few weeks. Helena hadn't thought that far ahead. Where would she go after the trial? What would she do? Her reputation in Willow Creek was destroyed, and she had no family to return to in the East. Samuel seemed to read her thoughts. One day at a time, Miss Zachary. First, we need to get you safely to Silverstone. Outside the store, he efficiently packed their supplies into his saddlebags, then turned to her. Ever ridden double before? Helena nodded. My father taught me to ride when I was young. Good. I'll mount first, then help you up behind me." The Palomino nickered softly as Samuel swung into the saddle with practiced ease. He reached down, and Helena grasped his forearm, surprised by the solid strength as he lifted her behind him as if she weighed nothing. "Hold on to my waist," he instructed. "It's about a 3-day ride if the weather holds." Helena hesitated, then placed her hands lightly on either side of his lean waist. Samuel clicked his tongue, and the horse moved forward at an easy walk. As they passed the courthouse, Helena couldn't resist a glance back. A small crowd had gathered, watching them leave. Judge Patterson stood on the steps, his expression unreadable. "They were ready to convict me without a second thought," Helena said quietly, more to herself than to Samuel. "People fear what they don't understand," he replied, surprising her. "And they didn't understand you. Because I'm an outsider?" Samuel guided the horse onto the trail heading west. "That, and you're different. Independent. A woman alone makes folks nervous in these parts." Helena considered this as they rode out of town. She'd come west after her parents died, leaving behind the painful memories and the well-meaning but suffocating sympathy of neighbors. She'd wanted to make her own way, using the sewing skills her mother had taught her. Now, barely 6 months into her fresh start, she was once again adrift. "Thank you," she said finally, "for saving me back there." Samuel's response was so low, she almost didn't catch it over the steady clip-clop of the horse's hooves. "Don't thank me yet, Miss Zachary. We've still got a long way to go." The sun was high overhead when they stopped to rest by a small creek. Samuel dismounted first, then reached up to help Helena down. Her legs felt wobbly after hours in the saddle, and she stumbled slightly against him. His hands steadied her at the waist, lingering just a moment before he stepped back. "We'll rest here for a bit. Let thunder drink," he said, leading the Palomino to the water. Helena stretched her aching muscles and took in their surroundings. The landscape had changed as they had ridden west, the flat plains giving way to rolling hills dotted with pine and aspen. In the distance, the dark smudge of mountains promised more challenging terrain ahead. Samuel returned with their canteens filled and handed one to her. "Drink. It's easy to get dry out here without realizing it." Helena took a grateful swallow of the cool water. "How did you become a marshal?" she asked, curious about the man who had so dramatically altered her fate. Samuel settled on a fallen log, stretching his long legs out before him. "Family tradition, you might say. My father was a lawman back in Texas. When he died, I took up the badge." He pulled off his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. "Been doing it for 8 years now. You must be good at it, to have your own territory so young." A shadow crossed his face. "The previous marshal was killed in an ambush. No one else wanted the job." Helena sensed there was more to that story, but didn't press. Instead, she asked, "How did you know about Thomas Reed being in Willow Creek?" "About the brooch?" Samuel took a drink from his own canteen before answering. "Been tracking Reed for months. He has a pattern works small towns, gets friendly with wealthy families, especially where there are hired help who might take the blame." His blue eyes met hers. "When I caught him in Silverstone, he had items from 3 different towns. I matched them to reports of thefts where someone else was accused." "And you came for all of them? The other accused people?" Samuel looked away. "Yours was the only case still pending. The others had already been resolved." Helena felt a chill despite the warm sun. Resolved, meaning the accused had already been convicted, perhaps even hanged. She had come so close to sharing their fate. "We should move on," Samuel said, standing abruptly. "I want to make it to Walker Station by nightfall." As they continued their journey, Helena found herself becoming increasingly aware of the man whose life was now entwined with hers, the steady strength of his back against her chest, the way he instinctively slowed thunder when the trail grew rough, protecting her from the jarring gate, the vigilant way his eyes scanned the horizon, missing nothing. By late afternoon, the sun was slipping toward the western peaks, casting long shadows across their path. Helena was exhausted, every muscle protesting the unaccustomed hours in the saddle. Just when she thought she couldn't endure another minute, Samuel pointed ahead. "Walker's Station. We'll stop there for the night." The station turned out to be little more than a sturdy log building with a small stable attached, sitting in a clearing surrounded by pines. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a weathered sign swung on a post near the door. An older man, with a magnificent white beard, emerged as they approached. "Well, I'll be damned, if it ain't Marshal Nash," he called out, grinning broadly. "Been wondering when you'd pass back through." Samuel dismounted and helped Helena down, her legs nearly buckling beneath her. "Evening, Walker. Need a room for the night. 2, if you've got them." Walker's bushy eyebrows shot up as he noticed Helena. "Well now, don't often see a lady out this way." He gave a slight bow. "Madam, welcome to Walker's station. Ain't much, but it's safe and the food's hot." Helena managed a smile despite her exhaustion. "Thank you, sir." "Got just one room available," Walker said, turning back to Samuel. "The Johnson family's taking up the other 2, heading to Oregon Territory." Samuel glanced at Helena, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly. After nearly being convicted of a crime she didn't commit, sharing a room with the marshal seemed a minor concern. "That'll do," Samuel told Walker. "And whatever you've got, cooking smells good." "Venison stew. The missus just put fresh biscuits in the oven, too." Inside, the station was surprisingly cozy. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room, with several wooden tables and chairs scattered about. A woman, who could only be Mrs. Walker, plump and rosy-cheeked, emerged from what must have been the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Samuel Nash, as I live and breathe," she exclaimed, "and you've brought a lady friend." Before either could correct her assumption, she hustled over to Helena. "You poor dear, you look done in. Come sit by the fire while I get you some tea. Supper's nearly ready." Helena gratefully sank into the chair Mrs. Walker indicated, the warmth of the fire seeping into her chilled bones. Samuel spoke quietly with Walker, no doubt explaining the circumstances of their journey, while the older man nodded gravely. Mrs. Walker returned with a steaming mug of tea that smelled of herbs and honey. "Drink up, dear. It'll restore your strength. And I've put extra blankets in the room. Nights get cold up here." "Thank you for your kindness," Helena said, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Any friend of the Marshal's is welcome here," Mrs. Walker replied with a wink that made Helena blush. Supper was served at a long table shared with the Johnson family, a father, mother, and 3 children heading west to claim land in Oregon. The venison stew was hearty and delicious, the biscuits light and fluffy. Helena hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food was before her. The conversation flowed easily, with Mr. Johnson asking Samuel about the trail conditions ahead, and Mrs. Walker fussing over everyone having enough to eat. Helena found herself relaxing for the first time in weeks, the terror of the courtroom beginning to recede. After the meal, the Johnsons retired to their rooms, the children yawning widely. Mr. Walker brought out a bottle of whiskey and poured a small amount for himself and Samuel. "Miss Zachary, can I offer you a medicinal nip?" he asked with a twinkle in his eye. "Might help with the saddle soreness." Helena hesitated, then nodded. "Just a little. Thank you." The whiskey burned going down, but left a pleasant warmth in its wake. Mrs. Walker showed them to their room, a simple space with a single bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. A colorful quilt brightened the plain wooden walls. "There's washing water in the pitcher," she said. "Privy's out back, breakfast at sunrise." When they were alone, an awkward silence fell. Helena stood by the window, looking out at the darkening forest, while Samuel remained near the door. "I'll sleep on the floor," he said finally. "You take the bed." Helena turned to face him. "That hardly seems fair. You've been riding just as long as I have." Samuel's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. "I've slept in worse places, Miss Zachary." "Helena," she said suddenly. "Please, call me Helena. After everything that's happened." "Miss Zachary seems too formal." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Helena?" He said her name carefully, as if testing the feel of it on his tongue. "And I'm Samuel, though most folks just call me Sam." "Sam," she repeated. "Still, I can't take your bed." "It's not my bed," he pointed out reasonably. "And you've been through an ordeal. Take the bed, Helena, please." Too tired to argue further, she nodded. "At least take one of the blankets for the floor." While Samuel took care of Thunder and spoke with Walker about their departure in the morning, Helena used the opportunity to wash and change into the fresh clothes they had purchased. The simple cotton nightgown was a luxury after 2 weeks in the same dress while awaiting trial. When Samuel returned, he knocked discreetly on the door. "Decent?" "Yes." "Come in," she called, already seated on the edge of the bed, her hair loose around her shoulders. Samuel entered, carrying his bedroll. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her hair, rich honey blonde waves that reached halfway down her back, but he quickly looked away. "Walker says the weather should hold tomorrow," he said, arranging his bedroll near the door. "If we make good time, we can reach Miller's Crossing by nightfall." Helena nodded, suddenly shy in their confined quarters. "What happens when we reach Silverstone?" she asked, needing to focus on practical matters. Samuel sat on his bedroll, removing his boots. "You'll give a statement about seeing Reed at the Montgomerys. Then when the circuit judge arrives, you'll testify at the trial." He looked up at her. "After that, it's up to you. You'll be free to go wherever you choose." The question that had been haunting her surfaced again. "And where would that be? I can't go back to Willow Creek." "You have no family elsewhere?" Helena shook her head. "My parents died last year. Influenza. I came west afterward." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "Silverstone's a growing town. They could use a skilled seamstress." The suggestion hung in the air between them, an offering Helena wasn't sure she was ready to accept. Instead of responding directly, she asked, "Tell me about Silverstone." As she settled under the quilt, Samuel described the town he protected, the main street with its row of false-fronted buildings, the new schoolhouse being built, the community of miners, ranchers, and shopkeepers who called it home. His deep voice painted a picture of a place that sounded far more welcoming than Willow Creek had ever been. Helena's eyes grew heavy as she listened. The last thing she remembered before drifting off was Samuel's voice, gentle in the lamplight, and the strange feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, things might turn out all right after all. Dawn broke crisp and clear, painting the eastern sky in delicate pinks and golds. Helena woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, momentarily disoriented by her surroundings. The events of the previous day came rushing back: the courtroom, the marshal's timely arrival, their journey. Samuel's bedroll was already neatly packed, and his absence told her he must have risen early. She dressed quickly in her new traveling clothes, a practical brown skirt, white blouse, and sturdy boots. Her hair she plaited into a single thick braid that hung down her back. In the main room, the Johnson family was already at breakfast, the children squabbling good-naturedly over the last biscuit. Samuel sat at a small table near the window, nursing a cup of coffee. His eyes found hers as she entered, a flicker of something appreciation, perhaps crossing his face before he schooled his expression. "Morning," he said, rising slightly as she approached. "Sleep well?" "Better than I expected," Helena admitted, taking the seat across from him. "Though I fear I'm even more sore today than yesterday." Mrs. Walker appeared with a plate piled high with eggs, bacon, and biscuits. "Eat up, dear. Nothing worse than riding on an empty stomach. And I've packed some food for your journey." The food was delicious, and Helena found herself hungrier than she'd been in weeks. Prison fare had been barely edible, and before that, anxiety had robbed her of appetite. "The trail gets rougher from here," Samuel said as they ate. "We'll be heading into the foothills. If it gets too difficult riding double, we can look for a mount for you at Miller's Crossing." Helena nodded, touched by his consideration. "I'll manage. I don't want to delay our journey." They set out as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, the air still cool but promising warmth later. Helena found it easier to settle behind Samuel on Thunder's broad back, her body remembering the rhythm of riding. The landscape grew more dramatic as they traveled, the rolling hills giving way to steeper terrain dotted with pine and spruce. Streams tumbled over rocks, their waters clear and cold from the mountain snowmelt. In the distance, peaks thrust upward, their highest points still capped with snow despite the June warmth. They rode in comfortable silence for the most part, stopping occasionally to rest Thunder and stretch their legs. During one such stop, as they shared the bread and cheese Mrs. Walker had packed, Samuel asked the question Helena had been dreading. "How did you end up in Willow Creek? It's not exactly on the main routes west." Helena broke a piece of cheese into smaller bits, buying time before answering. "I saw an advertisement in a Denver newspaper. Mrs. Montgomery was looking for a seamstress with experience in fine ladies' wear. She met his gaze. My mother trained me well. We had a small dressmaking shop in Philadelphia before the influenza, Samuel finished for her when she trailed off. Helena nodded. I needed to go somewhere new, somewhere without memories. She gave a bitter laugh. I certainly got that wish, though not in the way I'd hoped. Samuel studied her, his blue eyes thoughtful. You're stronger than you know, Helena. Most women alone wouldn't have traveled west at all, let alone after such a loss. His words warmed something inside her that had been cold for too long. What about you? She asked. You mentioned your father was a lawman, but what about the rest of your family? A shadow passed over Samuel's face. Mother died when I was 12. I have a younger sister, Abigail, married to a rancher near Austin. He took a drink from his canteen. We write, but I haven't seen her in 3 years. You must miss her. Every day, he admitted quietly. But this is the life I chose. A solitary one? His eyes met hers. Comes with the badge. Hard to put down roots when trouble might call you away at any moment. Harder still to ask someone to accept that kind of life. There was a weight to his words that suggested personal experience, but Helena didn't press. Instead, she gathered the remains of their meal and packed them away. We should continue if we want to reach Miller's Crossing by nightfall, she said. Samuel nodded, helping her back onto Thunder. This time, when she placed her hands at his waist, they felt less like a stranger's. The trail grew steadily more challenging as the day progressed, winding through narrow passes and along precipitous drops. Helena found herself holding tighter to Samuel, especially when Thunder picked his way across loose shale. You're doing fine, Samuel encouraged after a particularly difficult stretch. Most women I know would be complaining by now. Helena smiled, though he couldn't see it. Most women you know probably weren't facing prison yesterday. This is infinitely preferable. His low chuckle rumbled through his back and into her chest. Fair point. By mid-afternoon, dark clouds began gathering over the mountains to the west. Samuel eyed them with concern. Storm's coming, he said. We need to make better time. He urged Thunder to a faster pace where the trail allowed, and Helena held on tighter, trusting both horse and rider to keep her safe. The wind picked up, bringing with it the scent of rain and the distant rumble of thunder. How much farther? Helena asked as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Too far, Samuel replied grimly. There's a line shack about a mile ahead. We'll shelter there until the storm passes. The rain came in earnest then, driven by gusting wind that cut through Helena's clothes despite her shawl. By the time the small cabin came into view, they were both soaked through and shivering. Samuel dismounted quickly and helped Helena down, then led Thunder to a lean-to attached to the side of the cabin. Get inside, he told her, pressing the key into her cold hand. I'll take care of Thunder and be right behind you. The cabin was small but solid, clearly maintained as a shelter for just such emergencies. Helena's trembling fingers struggled with the lock, but she finally managed to open the door and stumble inside. It was a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow cot against one wall, and a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs. A stack of firewood stood ready beside the hearth. By the time Samuel entered, shaking rain from his hat, Helena had laid kindling in the fireplace and was searching for matches. In the box on the mantel, Samuel said, closing the door against the howling wind. Always kept in the same place in these line shacks. Sure enough, Helena found the matches and soon had a small fire crackling in the grate. The warmth was welcome, but her wet clothes still clung uncomfortably to her skin. Samuel rummaged in his saddlebags, which he'd brought in from Thunder's saddlebags. I have a spare shirt, he said, holding out a clean flannel garment. It'll be too big, but it's dry. Helena hesitated, then took the offered shirt. Turn around, she said, and he obliged, facing the wall while she peeled off her wet blouse and skirt, hanging them on chairs near the fire to dry. Samuel's shirt fell to her knees, the sleeves extending well past her fingertips, but it was indeed dry and smelled faintly of soap and pine. Decent, she said when she'd finished. Samuel turned and quickly averted his eyes when he saw her bare legs below the hem of his shirt. He cleared his throat. I'll check on Thunder, he said, and was out the door before she could respond. When he returned several minutes later, His hair was plastered to his head, and his clothes clung to his lean frame. Helena had built up the fire and was sitting on the edge of the cot, her braid undone so her hair could dry. "There's coffee in the supplies," she said, gesturing to a shelf she'd discovered. "And some beans and salt pork, enough for a meal." Samuel nodded, water dripping from his chin. "First, I need to get dry." Helena quickly turned her back, giving him the same privacy he'd afforded her. She heard the rustle of fabric and the soft thud of wet clothes being draped over furniture. When he cleared his throat again, she turned to find him in dry pants but bare-chested, using a rough towel to dry his hair. Her breath caught at the sight of him. Lean and hard-muscled, his torso bore several scars, testaments to the dangers of his profession. A particularly vicious-looking mark curved along his left side, disappearing around his back. Samuel saw her looking and paused. "Knife," he said simply. 2 years ago, man didn't want to be arrested for beating his wife. "What happened to him?" Helena asked softly. "Serving 20 years in territorial prison." Samuel pulled on a dry shirt, much to Helena's mingled relief and disappointment. The wife moved back east with her sister. Outside, the storm raged, rain lashing against the small windows and wind howling through the pines. Inside, the fire cast a warm glow over the cabin as Samuel set about making coffee and preparing a simple meal from the supplies. Helena watched him work, efficient and capable even in these domestic tasks. "You've done this before," she observed. Samuel glanced up from the pot of beans he was stirring. "Life of a marshal means a lot of nights on the trail. You learn to manage. Or you go hungry," Helena added with a small smile. His answering smile transformed his face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger. "Exactly." They ate at the small table, the simple fare made delicious by hunger and the warmth of the fire. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating, the thunder now directly overhead. "Looks like we're here for the night," Samuel said, glancing toward the window where rain streamed down the glass. "We won't make Miller's Crossing today." Helena nodded, suddenly aware of how small the cabin was and how there was only one narrow cot. As if reading her thoughts, Samuel stood and began arranging his bedroll on the floor near the fire. "You'll take the cot," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't open for discussion. "Thank you," Helena said simply, too tired to argue. As night fell and the storm continued its assault on the mountains, they sat before the fire, the crackling flames, the only light in the cabin. Samuel produced a small flask from his saddlebags and offered it to Helena. "To ward off the chill," he explained. She took a small sip, the whiskey burning pleasantly as it went down. "Were you always going to be a lawman?" she asked, handing the flask back. "Following your father's footsteps?" Samuel stared into the fire, turning the flask in his hands. "No," he said finally. "I wanted to be a doctor. Even started studying before the war came." "The war? You fought?" He nodded. "Confederate Army. Not because I believed in the cause my family never owned slaves, but because Texas was home." His eyes remained fixed on the flames. "Saw too much death. Did too much killing. When it was over, I couldn't see myself healing people anymore. Not with those memories." Helena watched the play of emotions across his face. Regret, sorrow, resignation. "So you turned to the law instead." "My father needed help. He was getting older, and the territory was getting wilder." Samuel took another drink from the flask. "Found I had a talent for it, for reading people, for staying calm when others panicked, for doing what needed doing. Like riding to Willow Creek to save a woman you'd never met," Helena said softly. His eyes finally met hers. "That was just justice." "No," Helena contradicted. "Justice would have been sending a telegram about Reed's arrest. You came yourself. You stood in that courtroom and said—" She paused, remembering his exact words. "You said, 'Her place is with me.'" In the firelight, Helena thought she saw color rise in Samuel's face. "It was the fastest way to get you released," he said, looking away again. Judges respect another lawman's authority. Helena wasn't entirely convinced, but she let it pass. "Well, whatever your reasons, I'm grateful." She stifled a yawn. "You should sleep," Samuel said, rising to his feet. "Morning will be here before you know it." Helena retreated to the narrow cot, pulling the rough blanket over herself. Samuel added another log to the fire, then settled onto his bedroll, his long frame barely fitting between the hearth and the table. "Samuel," Helena said into the darkness. Do you think he'll be convicted? Reed?" There was a pause before he answered. "Yes. We have the stolen items, multiple witnesses. He'll go away for a long time." "Good," she murmured, her eyes growing heavy. "Good." The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was Samuel's profile, outlined against the dying fire, keeping watch even in the depths of the night. The storm passed during the night, and dawn brought clear skies and the fresh scent of rain-washed earth. Helena woke to find Samuel already up, stoking the fire and heating water for coffee. "Morning," he said when he noticed her stirring. "How'd you sleep?" "Well," Helena admitted, sitting up and running a hand through her tangled hair. "Better than I expected on such a narrow bed." "Your clothes should be dry," Samuel said, nodding toward where her skirt and blouse hung near the fire. "I'll step outside while you dress." While he checked on Thunder, Helena quickly changed back into her own clothes, grateful to find them dry and warm. She braided her hair into a single plait, then set about helping prepare a simple breakfast from the remaining supplies. "We should reach Miller's Crossing by mid-afternoon," Samuel said as they ate. "We can stay there tonight, get a fresh start in the morning. From there, it's only a day's ride to Silverstone." Helena nodded, a strange mixture of anticipation and trepidation filling her at the thought of reaching their destination. The journey, despite its hardships, had provided a curious respite, a time out of time, where her only concern was the trail ahead and the man beside her. "What's it like?" she asked. "Miller's Crossing." "Bigger than Walker's Station, smaller than Willow Creek. Started as a mining town, but the silver played out 5 years back. Now, it's mostly a trading post for the ranches in the valley." Samuel finished his coffee. "They have a proper inn, at least. You'll get a real bed tonight." "And you?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Me too, though in a different room. Miller's Crossing is a bit more proper than Walker's Station." They set out as soon as the sun had climbed high enough to dry the worst of the mud on the trail. The air was cool and fresh after the storm, and wildflowers had sprung up overnight, dotting the meadows with splashes of color. Helena found she was growing accustomed to riding behind Samuel, to the rhythm of Thunder's steady gait and the solid presence of the marshal before her. When the trail widened enough to ride side by side, she almost missed the excuse to hold on to him. "Tell me about your sister," Helena said, as they rode through a particularly beautiful stretch of pine forest. "Abigail, you said?" Samuel glanced over his shoulder, surprised by the personal question. "Abby," he said after a moment. "She's 4 years younger, stubborn as a mule and twice as clever. Married a good man, has 2 little ones now." Pride warmed his voice. "She wanted me to settle near them, but you had a badge," Helena finished for him. "Yes." He paused. "What about you? Any siblings?" Helena shook her head. "Just me. My mother had several miscarriages before and after I was born. The doctor said it was a miracle she had me at all." "Your parents must have doted on you." "They did," Helena said, a smile in her voice despite the pang of loss. "My father called me his golden miracle because of my hair. He used to say I lit up the room when I entered." "He wasn't wrong," Samuel said so quietly she almost didn't hear it. The trail descended into a verdant valley where a river wound its way through stands of aspen and cottonwood. In the distance, Helena could make out buildings clustered along the riverbank Miller's Crossing. As they approached the town, Helena became increasingly aware of her appearance travel-worn and dusty, her hair escaping its braid, her skirt wrinkled from being wet and dried by the fire. She straightened her shoulders, determined not to show her discomfort. Miller's Crossing proved to be exactly as Samuel had described, a small but bustling community centered around a trading post, where the river could be forded. The main street was lined with false-fronted buildings, a general store, a smithy, a barber shop, and at the far end, a 2-story structure with a sign proclaiming it the River Inn. People paused in their activities to watch as Samuel guided Thunder down the main street. A few called out greetings, recognizing the marshal from previous visits. Samuel responded with nods and brief waves, keeping Thunder at a steady walk until they reached the inn. "Marshal Nash!" A portly man with an impressive mustache hurried out to greet them. Didn't expect to see you back so soon." "Mr. Miller," Samuel acknowledged, dismounting before helping Helena down. "Need 2 rooms for the night and a good meal." Miller's eyes darted curiously to Helena, who straightened her skirt and lifted her chin despite her bedraggled appearance. "This is Miss Helena Zachary," Samuel said formally. "She's under the protection of the Marshal's office, traveling to Silverstone to give testimony in the Reed case." Understanding dawned in Miller's eyes. "The thief you caught? Well, Miss Zachary, you're most welcome here. My wife will be pleased to have another lady to talk to." He gestured toward the inn. Come in, come in. Betsy will show you to a room where you can freshen up." The inn was simple but clean, with a dining room on the first floor and rooms above. Mrs. Miller, as plump and cheerful as her husband, fussed over Helena, providing hot water, a cake of lavender soap, and the promise of a proper dinner. "Poor dear, traveling these rough trails," she clucked as she showed Helena to a small but comfortable room. "And with only the Marshal for company, though I must say, if one must have a traveling companion, you could do worse than Samuel Nash. Finest man with a badge in 3 territories, my husband says." Left alone, Helena gratefully washed away the dust of the trail, changed into her spare blouse, and redid her hair, coaxing the golden waves into a neater braid. The simple acts of grooming restored both her appearance and her spirits. When she descended to the dining room, she found Samuel already there, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt. He rose when she entered, his eyes taking in her improved appearance with obvious appreciation. "You look rested," he said as she joined him at the table. "Amazing what a basin of hot water can do," she replied with a small smile. Dinner was hearty and plentiful, roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and apple pie for dessert. As they ate, other patrons drifted in, most nodding respectfully to Samuel. Helena noticed how they deferred to him, the subtle way his presence changed the atmosphere of the room. "They respect you," she observed quietly. Samuel glanced around the room. "They respect the badge. Most folks out here just want to live in peace. They're glad someone's willing to uphold the law." "It's more than that," Helena insisted. "I saw how that man at the bar looked at you like you once did him a service he hasn't forgotten." Samuel's expression softened. "Jim Bartlett. 2 years ago, his daughter was taken by a band of deserters turned outlaws. I tracked them for a week before I found her." His jaw tightened. "Got her back safe. Made sure those men never hurt another girl." The grim finality in his tone told Helena exactly what had happened to the outlaws. She studied the man across from her, capable of both great violence and great compassion, a complex man, far more than the stern lawman who had appeared so suddenly in the Willow Creek courtroom. After dinner, they sat in the inn's small parlor, enjoying the novelty of comfortable chairs after days on horseback. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "One more day," Samuel said, breaking a comfortable silence. "We'll reach Silverstone by tomorrow evening." Helena's heart gave an odd little flutter at the thought. "What will happen then? Exactly?" "I'll take you to Mrs. Holloway's boarding house. It's clean, respectable. She mainly houses the school teacher and a few other ladies from town." Samuel leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "The next day, you'll come to my office. Give your statement about Reed. That will be filed with the court until the circuit judge arrives. And then?" Samuel met her gaze. "Then you're free, Helena, to stay in Silverstone, to go elsewhere, whatever you choose." The thought should have been liberating. Instead, Helena felt a curious emptiness at the idea of Samuel Nash no longer being responsible for her welfare. During their brief journey, she'd grown accustomed to his steady presence, to the sense of safety he provided. "I have no money," she said finally. "No prospects. I told you, Silverstone needs a good seamstress. The women there would be glad of your skills." Samuel hesitated, then added, "And until you're established, the witness fee from the court will help. It's not much, but it would cover room and board for a few weeks." Helena nodded, grateful for his practical suggestions. "Thank you. For everything." Samuel's eyes held hers for a long moment. "No need for thanks. Just doing my—" "If you say just doing my job one more time, Samuel Nash, I may have to throw something at you," Helena interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. A startled laugh escaped him, genuine and warm. "Fair enough?" He stood, offering her his hand. "It's getting late, and we have an early start tomorrow." Helena placed her hand in his, allowing him to help her to her feet. His fingers were warm and calloused, engulfing her smaller hand completely. For a brief moment, they stood closer than propriety allowed, close enough that Helena could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, the day's growth of stubble along his jaw. "Good night, Helena," he said softly, releasing her hand. "Good night, Samuel," she replied, suddenly breathless. In her room, Helena lay awake long after she should have been asleep, her thoughts turning over and over. Tomorrow they would reach Silverstone. Tomorrow this strange journey would end. What then? Would Samuel Nash simply tip his hat and ride away, his duty discharged? The thought brought an unexpected ache to her chest, one that had nothing to do with the rigors of the trail and everything to do with the man who had saved her from injustice and showed her more consideration than any man since her father. Sleep, when it finally came, brought dreams of blue eyes and strong hands, of danger averted and promises kept. They set out at dawn, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten as Samuel helped Helena onto Thunder's back. The final day's journey would take them through a mountain pass and down into the valley where Silverstone nestled between pine-covered hills. "Weather's holding," Samuel observed as they rode out of Miller's Crossing. "We should make good time." Helena nodded, adjusting her position behind him. After 3 days of riding double, her body had adapted somewhat, though she knew she'd be sore again by day's end. "Is the pass difficult?" "It can be," Samuel admitted. "But Thunder knows the way, and the trail's been improved since the Silver Strike. We'll be fine." The morning passed pleasantly as they ascended into the mountains. The trail wound through stands of pine and aspen, occasionally opening to reveal spectacular vistas of the ranges beyond. Helena found herself storing away these images, these moments, knowing they would soon be memories. They stopped at midday by a clear mountain stream, sharing the last of Mrs. Miller's provisions, bread, cheese, and dried apple slices. The air was cooler at this elevation, crisp and sweet with the scent of pine. "The pass is just ahead," Samuel said, gesturing toward a gap between two peaks. "Once we're through, it's downhill all the way to Silverstone." Helena studied his profile as he gazed toward the pass, noting the strength of his jawline, the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. In just a few days, she had come to know this man better than she'd known anyone since her parents. The thought was both comforting and unsettling. "Samuel," she said suddenly, "what would have happened if you hadn't come to Willow Creek? If you hadn't arrived when you did?" His expression darkened. "Don't think about that." "But I need to know," Helena insisted. "How close was I to—" Samuel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Too close." The jury was already leaning toward conviction. Another hour, maybe less. Helena's breath caught. "And you rode all night to get there in time." He looked away. "I knew what was at stake." "My life," Helena said softly. "You saved my life, Samuel Nash. Not just from prison, but from what would have come after. A woman convicted of theft, with no family, no protection." The bleakness of that alternate future hung in the air between them. Samuel reached out suddenly, taking her hand in his. "But it didn't happen," he said firmly. "You're here, you're safe, and you're going to have a chance at a new life in Silverstone." Helena looked down at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers, so much stronger, yet he held her with such gentleness. "Yes," she said, "a new life." The moment stretched between them, filled with words unsaid. Then Samuel cleared his throat and released her hand. "We should move on," he said, rising to his feet. "Still have the pass to navigate before dark." The trail through the pass proved as challenging as Samuel had implied, narrowing in places to barely wider than Thunder's shoulders. Sheer rock faces rose on one side, while the other fell away in dizzying drops. Helena clung tightly to Samuel, her face pressed against his back when the path grew particularly treacherous. "Almost through," he assured her when they paused to let Thunder rest. "The worst is behind us." True to his word, the trail soon widened again, beginning its descent toward the valley below. As they rounded a bend, the view opened up, and Helena gasped. Nestled in a verdant valley, protected by mountains on three sides, lay Silverstone. Even from this distance she could make out the orderly grid of streets, the church steeple rising above the other buildings, the ribbon of river that curved along the town's western edge. Smoke rose from chimneys, and in the late afternoon sun, the windows of the larger buildings gleamed gold. "It's beautiful," Helena breathed. "Home," Samuel said simply. But there was pride in his voice. The descent took another hour, the trail switching back and forth across the mountainside. As they neared the valley floor, Helena could see fields of wheat and corn, cattle grazing in fenced pastures, and orchards heavy with early summer fruit. The town was lucky, Samuel explained as they rode past a particularly prosperous-looking farm. The silver didn't play out completely, just enough that the big mining companies lost interest. The smaller operations still turn a profit, and the farmers and ranchers who came with the boom decided to stay. The main road into town was wide and well-maintained, lined with cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. As they approached the outskirts, people began to notice their arrival. Children stopped their play to watch, women paused in hanging laundry, men looked up from their work. "Marshal's back!" someone called, and the word spread quickly. By the time they reached the main street, a small crowd had gathered. Helena felt suddenly self-conscious, aware of her travel-worn appearance and the curious glances directed her way. "Marshal Nash!" A portly man in a fine suit hurried forward. "We weren't expecting you back so soon." "Mayor Wilson," Samuel acknowledged with a nod. "Had business in Willow Creek that couldn't wait." The mayor's eyes darted to Helena, curiosity evident in his expression. Before he could question further, Samuel continued. "This is Miss Helena Zachary. She'll be giving testimony in the Reed case. Miss Zachary, Mayor Wilson." The mayor's eyebrows rose. "The Reed case. Well, well, Miss Zachary, welcome to Silverstone. We're most grateful for your assistance in bringing that scoundrel to justice." Helena managed a polite nod, increasingly aware of the stares from the townspeople. She had not expected to be the center of such attention upon arrival. Samuel seemed to sense her discomfort. "If you'll excuse us, Mayor, Miss Zachary has had a long journey. I'm taking her to Mrs. Holloway's to get settled." Of course," the mayor said, stepping back. "Mrs. Holloway is expecting her, I presume." A flicker of concern crossed Samuel's face. "I sent a telegram from Miller's Crossing, but it may not have arrived ahead of us." "No matter," the mayor assured them. "Mrs. Holloway always has a room ready for respectable visitors." He tipped his hat to Helena. "Good day, Miss Zachary. I'm sure we'll see more of each other during your stay." Samuel guided Thunder further down the main street, past the general store, a millinery, a bank, and finally the marshal's office, a solid building with a sign proclaiming Silverstone Marshal in bold letters. Next door stood a two-story brick building with a sign reading Holloway Boarding House. "Here we are," Samuel said, reining Thunder to a stop. "Home for you, at least for now." Helena felt a curious mixture of relief and regret as Samuel helped her down from the horse. Her legs were unsteady after the long ride, and she stumbled slightly against him. His hand steadied her at the waist, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," she said, stepping back and straightening her skirt. "For everything." Samuel nodded, something unreadable in his blue eyes. "Let's get you settled." Mrs. Holloway proved to be a brisk, efficient woman in her 50s, with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and spectacles perched on her nose. If she was surprised by their arrival, she hid it well. "Marshal Nash," she greeted them at the door, "and this must be Miss Zachary. Your telegram arrived just an hour ago. The blue room is prepared, as you requested." Helena glanced at Samuel, surprised that he had specified a particular room. He avoided her gaze, addressing Mrs. Holloway instead. "Thank you, madam. Miss Zachary has had a difficult journey. She could use a hot meal and an early night." "Of course," Mrs. Holloway agreed, ushering Helena inside. "Supper is at 6, but I can have a tray sent up if you prefer to rest, my dear." "That's very kind, but I'm sure I'll be fine for supper," Helena said, not wanting to inconvenience her hostess or appear weak before the other boarders she had yet to meet. Mrs. Holloway nodded approvingly. "The dining room is through there, now. Let me show you to your room." Samuel remained at the door. "I'll bring your things," he told Helena, referring to the small bundle of clothes and necessities they'd purchased in Willow Creek. While Mrs. Holloway led Helena upstairs, explaining the house rules and meal times, Samuel fetched her belongings from Thunder's saddlebags. When they returned downstairs, he was waiting in the small parlor, her bundle in his hands. "The blue room," Mrs. Holloway said, he asked, and at her nod, handed the bundle to Helena. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. "I should see to Thunder," Samuel said, breaking the moment. "He's earned a good rub-down and extra oats after the journey." He hesitated, then added, "I'll come by tomorrow morning, around 9, to escort you to my office for your statement." Helena nodded, suddenly aware that this was a parting of sorts. Their journey was over. She was safely delivered to Silverstone, and Samuel Nash would return to his duties as marshal. "Until tomorrow, then," she said, striving for a normal tone despite the unexpected tightness in her throat. Samuel studied her face for a long moment, as if memorizing her features. Then he touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that had become familiar during their journey. "Until tomorrow, Helena." When he was gone, Mrs. Holloway showed Helena to the blue room on the second floor, a pleasant space with blue floral wallpaper, a comfortable-looking bed, a washstand, and a small writing desk beneath a window that overlooked the main street. From this vantage point, Helena could see the marshal's office and, if she leaned slightly, the livery stable where Samuel had taken Thunder. "It's lovely," Helena said, genuinely pleased with the accommodations. "Marshal Nash specifically requested this room for you," Mrs. Holloway remarked, a hint of curiosity in her tone. "Said you would appreciate the view." Helena felt warmth rise in her cheeks. "The marshal has been very considerate during our journey." Mrs. Holloway's sharp eyes missed nothing. "Indeed. Well, I'll leave you to freshen up before supper. There's hot water in the pitcher and towels in the chest. If you need anything else, just ring the bell." Left alone, Helena sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the past few days. From the terror of the courtroom to the long journey through wilderness, from the threat of prison to the promise of a new beginning, it was almost too much to process. And through it all, Samuel Nash had been her constant companion, her protector, her guide. Tomorrow he would take her statement, and then... what? Would they become mere acquaintances, nodding politely when they passed on Silverstone's streets? The thought brought an unexpected pain. With a sigh, Helena rose and began to unpack her few possessions. Whatever the future held, she was alive and free, with a roof over her head and the chance to build a new life. For now, that would have to be enough. Supper at Mrs. Holloway's boarding house was a more social affair than Helena had expected. Besides herself and Mrs. Holloway, there were 4 other boarders: Miss Prentice, the town's school teacher, the widow Jenkins, who owned the millinery shop, Dr. Collins, a young physician new to town, and Mr. Abernathy, an elderly gentleman who had once been the town's banker and now lived on his savings. They received Helena with curious politeness, clearly bursting with questions about her arrival with the marshal, but too well-mannered to ask outright. It was Mrs. Holloway who finally addressed the obvious. "Miss Zachary is here to give testimony in the Reed case," she informed the table, as she served a delicious beef stew. "She'll be staying with us until the circuit judge arrives." "The Reed case!" Miss Prentice exclaimed. "The man who stole Mrs. Montgomery's brooch in Willow Creek?" Helena nearly dropped her spoon. "You know about that?" "Word travels fast in these parts," Dr. Collins explained with a kind smile. "Especially when it involves Marshal Nash bringing in a notorious thief. And when he rides out again immediately afterward, without explanation," added the widow Jenkins with a significant look at Helena. Helena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "The marshal came to Willow Creek because Thomas Reed had stolen items from several towns, including Mrs. Montgomery's brooch. I was falsely accused of the theft." A momentary silence fell over the table as the implications sank in. "Dear me," Mrs. Holloway said finally. "How fortunate the marshal arrived in time to prevent a miscarriage of justice." "Very fortunate," Helena agreed quietly. The conversation turned to other topics after that, with the boarders filling Helena in on Silverstone's history and current events. She learned that the town had been founded 15 years earlier during the Silver Rush. had nearly become a ghost town when the largest mine closed and had revived thanks to determined residents who saw potential beyond the silver. "We have a proper school now," Miss Prentice said proudly. 28 pupils, from first grade through 8th. "And a church that doesn't double as a saloon on weekdays," added the widow Jenkins with a sniff. "Speaking of which," Dr. Collins said, "the Ladies' Aid Society is organizing a social on Saturday to raise funds for a proper church bell. You should come, Miss Zachary." "Oh, Helena hesitated, uncertain whether she would still be in Silverstone by Saturday. "Of course she'll come," Mrs. Holloway decided. "And perhaps bring Marshal Nash as her escort." The knowing looks exchanged around the table made Helena's cheeks burn even hotter. "The Marshal is simply doing his duty," she said firmly. "I'm a witness in a case he's pursuing." "Of course, my dear," Mrs. Holloway agreed, but her tone suggested she was merely humoring Helena. Later, as Helena prepared for bed in her comfortable room, she found herself gazing out the window toward the Marshal's office. A light still burned there, suggesting Samuel was working late. Was he preparing for their meeting tomorrow, writing his report on the Reed case, or simply avoiding an empty home after days on the trail with her? The thought that he might miss her company as she missed his was both comforting and unsettling. Helena had not expected to form any attachment during her ordeal, certainly not to the man who had saved her from injustice. Yet here she was, watching for a glimpse of him through his office window, already anticipating their meeting in the morning. With a sigh, Helena turned from the window and climbed into bed. Whatever her confused feelings, tomorrow would bring clarity. She would give her statement, fulfill her obligation to justice, and then decide what path her new life would take. Sleep came easily after the exhaustion of travel, but her dreams were filled with blue eyes and gentle hands, with danger averted and promises yet to be made. Morning dawned clear and bright, sunlight streaming through the curtains of the blue room. Helena woke feeling rested for the first time in weeks, the anxiety of the courtroom and the rigors of the journey finally behind her. She dressed with care in her cleanest blouse and skirt, brushed her golden hair until it shone, and pinned it in a simple but neat arrangement at the nape of her neck. Looking in the small mirror above the washstand, she was pleased to see that some of the strain had left her face. The woman who gazed back at her appeared composed, dignified, not the terrified defendant who had stood shaking in the Willow Creek courtroom just days ago. At breakfast, Helena learned more about Silverstone from her fellow boarders. The town was growing slowly but steadily, with new families arriving each month. There was talk of expanding the school, adding a proper town hall, perhaps even starting a newspaper. "And we desperately need a seamstress," the widow Jenkins remarked, eyeing Helena speculatively. "Since Mrs. Thornton moved to Denver, we've had to send away for any fine work." Helena's interest was piqued, despite her determination not to make any decisions yet. "What happened to Mrs. Thornton's shop? Is it still vacant?" "Indeed it is," Mrs. Holloway confirmed. "Small place on Cedar Street, but it has good light and a decent living space above. The rent is reasonable too, I hear." Before Helena could inquire further, there was a knock at the front door. Mrs. Holloway answered it, and moments later, Samuel Nash stood in the doorway of the dining room. Helena's heart gave a peculiar leap at the sight of him. He looked different here, in his own territory, more at ease, more authoritative. He wore a clean shirt under his black vest, his badge polished to a shine, his dark hair neatly combed. "Good morning, ladies, gentlemen," he greeted the table, tipping his hat. His eyes found Helena's, a brief smile softening his features. "Miss Zachary, I'm here to escort you to my office when you're ready." Helena nodded, dabbing her lips with her napkin and rising from the table. "I'm ready now, Marshal." As they walked the short distance to his office, Helena was acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople going about their morning business. Word of her arrival with the Marshal had clearly spread throughout Silverstone. "Don't mind them," Samuel said quietly. "Small towns run on gossip. They'll find something new to talk about soon enough." "I don't mind," Helena replied, though in truth the attention made her uncomfortable. "They seem like good people." "They are. Silverstone's been fortunate that way." The Marshal's office was a simple but orderly space with a desk, several chairs, a pot-bellied stove in one corner, and a row of wanted posters on the wall. A door at the back presumably led to the cells where Thomas Reed was being held. Samuel gestured to a chair in front of his desk. Please, sit down. This won't take long. Helena sat, folding her hands in her lap to still their slight trembling. Despite the friendliness of their journey, this was official business now. Samuel took his seat behind the desk, pulling out a sheet of paper and dipping a pen in ink. I need to take your formal statement about seeing Thomas Reed at the Montgomery residence in Willow Creek. Just tell me what you remember, as clearly as possible. Helena nodded and began to recount the day the traveling salesman had visited while she was fitting Mrs. Montgomery for a new dress. She described his appearance, his manner, the way he had examined the room's valuables with what she now recognized as a professional eye. He complimented Mrs. Montgomery's brooch specifically, she recalled, asked its history, where it had been purchased. She was flattered by his interest and told him it was a family heirloom from her husband's side. Samuel wrote rapidly, occasionally asking for clarification on a detail. When Helena had finished, he reviewed what he'd written, then pushed the paper across the desk. Please read this and sign at the bottom if it accurately reflects your statement. Helena read carefully, impressed by the clarity and precision of his writing. This is correct, she said, signing her name at the bottom. Samuel added his own signature as witness, then placed the paper in a folder. Thank you. This will be important evidence when the judge arrives. When will that be? Helena asked, suddenly realizing she didn't know how long she would need to remain in Silverstone. Hard to say exactly. The circuit judge covers a large territory. Best guess is 2 to 3 weeks. 2 to 3 weeks! The information hung in the air between them. 2 to 3 weeks during which Helena would need to find some means of supporting herself, some way to occupy her time in this unfamiliar town. As if reading her thoughts, Samuel leaned forward slightly. Helena, about your situation? It was the first time he had used her given name since their arrival in Silverstone, and the intimacy of it sent a small thrill through her. Yes? She prompted when he hesitated. The widow Jenkins mentioned that you're a skilled seamstress. Helena nodded. It's the only trade I know. My mother taught me from childhood. As Mrs. Holloway probably told you, Silverstone has been without a proper seamstress since Mrs. Thornton left. The ladies in town have been making do or sending to Denver for special occasions. He paused. The shop on Cedar Street is still available. Small, but it would be a start. Helena studied him, trying to read his intentions. Are you suggesting I stay in Silverstone permanently? Samuel met her gaze steadily. I'm suggesting you have options, Helena. More options than you had in Willow Creek. Before she could respond, the door to the office opened, and a young man hurried in, his expression worried. Marshal, there's trouble at the Silver Dollar. Jenkins and Harper are at it again, and this time they both drew guns. Samuel was on his feet instantly, checking his sidearm. Anyone hurt yet? No, sir. Bartender got them to take it outside, but they're facing off in the street now. Samuel turned to Helena. I have to deal with this. Will you wait here? It shouldn't take long. Helena nodded, and Samuel strode out, his deputy following close behind. Through the window, Helena could see a small crowd gathering further down the street. Curious despite herself, she moved to the window for a better view. Samuel approached the two men with calm authority, his hand resting casually on his holstered gun. Even from this distance, Helena could see how his presence changed the dynamic, the belligerent men backing down, their bravado deflating under his steady gaze. Within minutes, the confrontation was over. The men separated, one heading into the saloon, the other stomping off down the street. The crowd dispersed and Samuel returned to the office, shaking his head slightly. Jenkins and Harper, he explained as he closed the door, been feuding for years over a property line. Every few months they get liquored up and decide today's the day to settle it once and for all. You handled it well, Helena observed. No shots fired, no one arrested. Samuel shrugged, returning to his seat. Sometimes the badge is enough, sometimes it takes more. He studied her for a moment. You were watching from the window. It wasn't a question, but Helena nodded anyway. I was curious to see how the Marshal of Silverstone operates. A faint smile touched his lips. And? I'm impressed, she admitted. You diffuse the situation without violence, without humiliating either man. That's the goal. Most troubles can be settled without bullets if folks are given a chance to back down gracefully. Samuel leaned back in his chair. Now, where were we before the interruption? You were suggesting I consider staying in Silverstone, Helena reminded him. Opening a seamstress shop. Yes. His eyes held hers. It's just a suggestion, of course. You're free to go wherever you choose once the trial is over. Helena glanced around the office, thinking of the friendly boarders at Mrs. Holloway's, the vacant shop on Cedar Street, the quiet authority with which Samuel kept the peace in this growing town. I'd like to see the shop, she said finally, before I decide anything. Relief and something more complex flashed across Samuel's face. I'd be happy to show you. Now, if you like. The former Thornton dress shop proved to be a pleasant surprise. Located on a quiet side street just off the main thoroughfare, the small storefront had large windows to let in ample natural light, essential for detailed needlework. The shop itself was simply one large room with a counter and several built-in cabinets, but it was clean and well-maintained. A narrow staircase at the back led to living quarters above two small rooms and a rudimentary kitchen with a pump for water. The furniture Mrs. Thornton had left behind was basic but serviceable. A bed, a table with two chairs, a chest of drawers, and a comfortable-looking armchair by the window. It's perfect, Helena breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. Much nicer than I expected. Samuel leaned against the doorframe, watching her reaction. Rent is $8 a month, reasonable for Silverstone. Very reasonable, Helena agreed, already envisioning how she would arrange the shop below, what fabrics she would need to order, how she would advertise her services. Then reality intruded. But I have no money for rent, for supplies, for fabric. The witness fee from the court will cover the first month's rent with some left over, Samuel reminded her. And I'm sure arrangements could be made with the general store for initial supplies. Credit until you're established. Helena gave him a skeptical look. The storekeeper would extend credit to a complete stranger? Samuel cleared his throat. He would if the marshal vouched for her character. Samuel, Helena began, then stopped, unsure what to say. His kindness, his obvious desire to help her build a new life in his town, touched her deeply. Why are you doing all this? He straightened, no longer leaning against the doorframe. Because you deserve a fresh start. Because Silverstone needs a good seamstress. Because... He hesitated, then said more quietly, because I'd like you to stay. The simple honesty of his statement hung in the air between them, charged with implications neither was ready to address directly. Helena felt her cheeks warm, her heart beating a little faster. I'd like that too, she admitted. To stay, I mean. Relief softened Samuel's features. Then it's settled. We'll speak to Mr. Collins at the general store about supplies, and I'll talk to the owner about the rent. As they descended the stairs back to the shop, Helena's mind was already racing with plans. Possibilities opening before her that had seemed impossible just days ago when she stood trembling in the Willow Creek courtroom. There's one more thing, Samuel said as they stepped outside into the sunlight. The town social on Saturday. Mrs. Holloway mentioned it. Helena nodded. The fundraiser for the church bell. I was wondering... He paused, uncharacteristically hesitant. That is, would you consider attending with me, as my guest? Helena felt a flutter of pleasure at the formal invitation. I'd be honored, Marshal Nash, she said, deliberately using his title with a small smile. The corner of his mouth twitched upward. I'll call for you at 7 then, Miss Zachary. As they walked back toward Mrs. Holloway's, Helena found herself studying the town, with new eyes not as a temporary haven, but as a potential home. The neat streets, the solid buildings, the friendly nods from passers-by, all spoke of a community where she might belong, where she might build something lasting. And beside her walked the man who had made it all possible, the man who had said, in a crowded courtroom, with absolute conviction, "Her place is with me." At the time, she had thought he meant under his protection, in his custody. Now, she wondered if perhaps he had meant something more. The days that followed passed in a flurry of activity as Helena established herself in Silverstone. With Samuel's help, she secured the shop on Cedar Street, arranged credit for supplies with Mr. Collins at the general store, and began setting up her new business. Word spread quickly that a skilled seamstress had arrived in town, and before Helena had even formally opened her shop, Women began stopping by to inquire about her services. The widow Jenkins was among the first, commissioning a new Sunday dress and promising to recommend Helena to all her friends. "You'll be busy from sunrise to sunset within a week," she predicted, as Helena took her measurements. "The ladies of Silverstone have been making do with their own limited skills for far too long." Mrs. Holloway helped Helena create a simple sign for the shop: H. Zachary, Fine Dressmaking and Alterations. Mr. Abernathy, the retired banker, surprised her with a gift of a comfortable chair for customers to sit in while discussing their orders. "Every successful business needs to make its customers feel welcome," he said with a wink. "And in my experience, ladies who are comfortable tend to order more dresses." Through it all, Samuel Nash was a constant presence, not intrusive, but available whenever Helena needed advice or assistance. He helped her move her few belongings from Mrs. Holloway's to the rooms above the shop, carried heavy bolts of fabric from the general store, and introduced her to key members of the community. Each evening, he would stop by the shop before his final rounds of the town, ostensibly to check on her progress, but, Helena suspected, also to assure himself of her continued well-being. These brief visits became the highlight of her day, a moment to share her small triumphs and concerns with the man who had so dramatically altered the course of her life. By Saturday, Helena had settled into a tentative routine, with several commissions already underway and more promised. The shop was beginning to feel like her own, the living quarters above becoming a home. As evening approached, Helena found herself unusually nervous about the town's social. It would be her first public appearance in Silverstone, not directly related to her role as a witness or her establishment as a businesswoman. More significantly, it would be her first social engagement with Samuel Nash. She had only one dress suitable for the occasion, a deep blue muslin that she had quickly altered to improve the fit. Her golden hair she arranged in a more elaborate style than usual, with soft curls framing her face, and the rest pinned up in a neat chignon. As she studied her reflection in the small mirror, Helena was pleased to note that the fear and exhaustion that had marked her face in Willow Creek had faded. The woman who gazed back at her looked hopeful. Even happy a woman, ready to embrace a new beginning. At precisely 7 o'clock, there was a knock at the shop door downstairs. Helena descended to find Samuel waiting, hat in hand, wearing a clean black suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean strength of his frame. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he had trimmed his mustache. The badge still gleamed on his vest. A marshal was never truly off duty. His eyes widened appreciatively as Helena approached. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you," Helena replied, a blush warming her cheeks. "You look very handsome yourself." Samuel offered his arm, and Helena took it, feeling the solid strength beneath the fabric of his suit. As they walked toward the town hall where the social was being held, Helena was acutely aware of the curious glances from other townsfolk heading in the same direction. "People are staring," she murmured. "Let them," Samuel replied, covering her hand on his arm with his own. "They're not used to seeing their marshal with a beautiful woman on his arm." "Is that so unusual?" Helena asked, genuinely curious about the man's past. Samuel's mouth quirked in that half-smile she was coming to know well. "I've escorted Mrs. Holloway to church socials, and once took the widow Jenkins to a Christmas concert when her nephew couldn't come from Denver. But this is different." "How so?" Helena pressed, her heart beating a little faster. Samuel paused in their walk, turning to face her. "Because I'm not being polite or doing my duty as marshal tonight, Helena. I'm escorting you because there's nowhere else I'd rather be, and no one else I'd rather be with." The simple declaration took Helena's breath away. Before she could respond, they arrived at the town hall, where lanterns illuminated the entrance and the sounds of conversation and a fiddle player drifted out into the evening air. Inside, the hall had been transformed with bunting, flowers, and dozens of candles, tables laden with food and punch-lined one wall, while the center of the room had been cleared for dancing. Already several couples swirled to the lively tune, played by a trio of musicians on a small platform. "Marshal Nash," Mayor Wilson approached, his wife on his arm, "and Miss Zachary, delighted you could join us." As introductions were made and pleasantries exchanged, Helena found herself warmly welcomed by the townspeople. Many of the women expressed interest in her dressmaking skills, while others simply seemed curious about the newcomer who had arrived with their marshal. "You must save a dance for me, Miss Zachary," the mayor said with a jovial wink. "Can't let Nash monopolize the prettiest girl in the room all evening." Samuel's hand at the small of her back was a steady presence as they moved through the crowd. He seemed to know everyone, greeting each person by name, inquiring after family members, listening attentively to concerns both serious and trivial. "You're good at this," Helena observed as they finally reached the punch bowl. The social aspects of being marshal. Samuel handed her a cup of punch. Part of the job. People need to trust you, to know you're one of them, not just a badge and a gun. "They respect you," Helena said. "I can see it in how they defer to you, how they value your opinion." A shadow crossed his face. "Respect is earned in this territory, often the hard way. There have been difficult times, decisions I've had to make that weren't popular." Before Helena could inquire further, the music changed to a waltz, and Samuel set down his punch cup. "May I have this dance, Miss Zachary?" he asked formally, though his eyes held a warmth that was anything but formal. "You may, Marshal Nash," Helena replied, placing her hand in his. On the dance floor, Helena discovered another side of Samuel Nash. He moved with unexpected grace for such a powerful man, guiding her effortlessly through the waltz. His hand at her waist was respectful but firm, his eyes never leaving hers as they circled the floor. "You dance very well," Helena said, slightly breathless from the movement and from his proximity. "My mother insisted," Samuel replied with a small smile. "Said no son of hers would stomp around a dance floor like a buffalo, badge or no badge." The image made Helena laugh, the sound drawing glances from nearby dancers unused to seeing their serious marshal so at ease. As the waltz continued, Helena became increasingly aware of the solid strength of Samuel's shoulder beneath her hand, the subtle scent of soap and leather that she had come to associate with him, the way his eyes seemed to darken when they met hers. When the music ended, Samuel reluctantly released her, though his hand remained at the small of her back as they moved away from the dance floor. Throughout the evening, they danced several more times, separated occasionally as Helena was claimed by the mayor for a polka, and Samuel fulfilled his obligation to dance with Mrs. Wilson and several other prominent ladies of the town. Between dances, Samuel introduced Helena to more townspeople, all of whom welcomed her warmly. The schoolteacher, Miss Prentice, was particularly enthusiastic. "Oh, Miss Zachary, I've been making do with my own limited sewing skills for years," she exclaimed. "The thought of having a proper dress that actually fits is positively thrilling." As the evening progressed, Helena found herself genuinely enjoying the company of the Silverstone residents. They were hard-working, forthright people who valued community and looked out for one another, so different from the suspicious, judgmental townsfolk of Willow Creek who had been so quick to condemn her. It was nearly midnight when the social began to wind down. Families with children had departed earlier, but a good number of adults remained, reluctant to end the festive evening. The musicians played a final waltz, slower and more romantic than the earlier dances. Samuel's eyes held a question as he offered his hand to Helena. She took it without hesitation, stepping into his embrace as the music swelled. This time, he held her slightly closer, his hand more possessive at her waist, his eyes never leaving hers as they moved together in perfect harmony. "Thank you," Helena said softly as they danced. "For what?" "For everything. For saving me in Willow Creek, for bringing me to Silverstone, for helping me start over." Samuel's expression softened. "You don't need to thank me for doing what was right." "It was more than right," Helena insisted. "It was kind, generous, far beyond what duty required." The music was drawing to a close, the last notes lingering in the air. Around them, other couples were already beginning to separate, but Samuel continued to hold Helena close, his eyes searching hers. "Helena," he said quietly, so only she could hear, "I need to tell you something." But before he could continue, Mayor Wilson's booming voice cut through the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, a moment of your attention, please. Thanks to your generous contributions tonight, we have raised sufficient funds for not only a church bell, but also new hymn books for the congregation." Polite applause broke out, and the moment between Helena and Samuel was lost. As the crowd began to disperse, collecting wraps and bidding goodnights, Samuel offered Helena his arm once more. "May I walk you home?" he asked, a formal request that nonetheless held deeper implications. "Please," Helena replied simply. The night air was cool after the warmth of the crowded hall, a blanket of stars visible above the darkened streets of Silverstone. They walked in companionable silence, Helena's hand tucked in the crook of Samuel's elbow, their steps naturally falling into the same rhythm. When they reached the shop on Cedar Street, Samuel waited while Helena found her key and unlocked the door. Instead of saying goodnight immediately, he asked, "May I come in for a moment?" Helena hesitated only briefly before nodding. It wasn't proper, strictly speaking, to invite a man into her rooms at this hour. But after all they had shared on the journey from Willow Creek, such concerns seemed trivial. Inside, Helena lit a lamp, casting a soft glow over the shop. The dress forms and bolts of fabric created strange shadows on the walls. But there was something cozy about the space, something that already felt like home. Samuel removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a gesture Helena now recognized as one of his rare tells of nervousness. "What were you going to tell me?" she asked gently, before the mayor interrupted. Samuel looked up, his blue eyes intense in the lamplight. "I wanted to explain why I really came to Willow Creek." He took a deep breath. "It wasn't just about justice, Helena. It wasn't just about doing my duty." Helena's heart quickened. "What was it about then?" "When I caught Reed, when I found that brooch and heard about the woman accused of stealing it, a woman who fit your description, something—" He paused, searching for words. "Something told me I needed to get to you, that it couldn't wait, couldn't be handled by telegram or letter." He took a step closer, close enough that Helena could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I rode through the night, pushed thunder harder than I should have, because I couldn't bear the thought of you facing that jury alone, of you being convicted for something you didn't do." "You didn't even know me," Helena whispered. "No," Samuel agreed, "but I knew I had to find you. And then, in that courtroom, when I saw you standing there, shaking but still so dignified, so strong despite your fear." He shook his head slightly, as if still amazed by the memory. "I knew." "Knew what?" Helena asked, though part of her already understood. "That you were someone special, someone I wanted to know, someone I couldn't just save and then walk away from." His voice lowered. "When I told the judge, her place is with me, I meant it in ways I didn't fully understand at the time." Helena's breath caught in her throat. "And now? Do you understand now?" Samuel reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and touched her cheek with gentle fingers. "Now I understand that, in just a few days, you've become more important to me than anyone has been in a very long time. That the thought of you leaving Silverstone makes me feel hollow inside. That I want to see you every day, to hear your voice, to make you smile." His hand cradled her face now, his thumb brushing softly across her cheekbone. "I understand that I'm falling in love with you, Helena Zachary, and I pray that you might someday feel the same." Tears sprang to Helena's eyes, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming emotion. "Samuel," she whispered, covering his hand with her own, "I already do." For a moment, he seemed stunned by her admission. Then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers in the gentlest of kisses. It was brief, almost reverent, but it sealed something between them, a promise, a beginning. When Samuel drew back, his eyes were dark with emotion, his voice husky when he spoke. "I should go. It's late, and people will talk." Helena nodded, though she was reluctant to see him leave. "Will I see you tomorrow?" The smile that lit his face warmed her to her core. "Try to keep me away," he said, brushing one more feather-light kiss across her lips before settling his hat on his head and stepping toward the door. At the threshold, he paused, turning back to her. "Good night, Helena. Sleep well." "Good night, Samuel," she replied softly. After he left, Helena stood for a long moment in the quiet shop, her fingers touching her lips where his had been, her heart fuller than it had been in years. From the terror of the Willow Creek courtroom to this moment of unexpected joy, it was almost too much to comprehend. As she climbed the stairs to her rooms above the shop, Helena thought of the journey that had brought her here, of the man who had saved her in more ways than one, of the future that now stretched before them both. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Her place, it seemed, truly was with him. In the weeks that followed, Helena's life in Silverstone blossomed beyond her most hopeful expectations. Her dressmaking business flourished as word spread of her skill with a needle and her eye for fashion. Women from neighboring communities began making the journey to commission work, and Helena found herself busier than she had been, even in Philadelphia, at her mother's side. The shop on Cedar Street transformed under her touch. Bolts of fabric in various colors and textures lined the walls. Samples of her work adorned the dress forms in the window, and a comfortable sitting area welcomed clients to discuss their needs over tea. The rooms above became a true home, decorated simply but with personal touches that reflected Helena's growing sense of security and belonging. Through it all, Samuel was her steady companion, her support, her joy. Each evening after completing his rounds, he would stop by the shop, sometimes bringing small gifts, wildflowers gathered from the hillside, a book he thought she might enjoy. Once a kitten found abandoned behind the livery stable that quickly became Helena's devoted pet, and the shop's unofficial greeter. Their courtship progressed with a proper regard for appearances, but an underlying current of deepening affection that was obvious to anyone who saw them together. They attended church on Sundays, joined community gatherings, and occasionally rode out to enjoy picnics in the beautiful countryside surrounding Silverstone. As Helena became more integrated into the community, she discovered facets of Samuel's character that only enhanced her growing love for him. She observed his patience with children, his respect for the elderly, his unwavering commitment to justice tempered with compassion. The townspeople didn't just respect their marshal, they genuinely liked and trusted the man himself. 2 weeks after the social, the circuit judge finally arrived in Silverstone. Judge Harmon was a stern-looking man with bushy white eyebrows and a reputation for fairness. The trial of Thomas Reed was scheduled for the following day, with Helena as a key witness. The evening before the trial, Samuel came to the shop earlier than usual, his expression troubled. Reed's lawyer arrived with the judge, he explained as Helena served tea in her small sitting room above the shop. He's good sharp, experienced. He'll try to discredit your testimony, make you seem confused or unreliable. Helena set down her teacup. I'm not afraid, Samuel. I know what I saw. Reed was in the Montgomery home. He admired the brooch. He asked specific questions about it. Those are facts. Samuel reached across the table to take her hand. I know, but court can be intimidating, especially when someone is deliberately trying to fluster you. His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. Just tell the truth exactly as you remember it. Don't let him rush you or put words in your mouth. Helena turned her hand to clasp his. I won't. And I'm not the same woman who stood shaking in the Willow Creek courtroom. I'm stronger now. The pride that filled Samuel's eyes warmed her heart. Yes, you are, he agreed softly. One of the strongest women I've ever known. The trial the next day was held in the town hall, temporarily converted into a courtroom. It seemed all of Silverstone had turned out to witness the proceedings, filling the seats and standing along the walls. Helena sat in the front row, Samuel beside her, until she was called to testify. As she took the stand and was sworn in, Helena caught her first glimpse of Thomas Reed since that day at the Montgomery home. The handsome, charming salesman now looked haggard and resentful, his eyes cold as they followed her to the witness chair. The prosecutor questioned her first, establishing her presence in the Montgomery home on the day in question, and her observations of Reed. Helena answered clearly and confidently, describing exactly what she had seen and heard. When Reed's lawyer rose for cross-examination, his manner was immediately aggressive. Ms. Zachary, isn't it true that you yourself were accused of stealing the very brooch my client allegedly took? Objection, the prosecutor called. Ms. Zachary's false accusation has no bearing on this case. I'm establishing the witness's potential bias, Your Honor, Reed's lawyer argued. Judge Harmon considered briefly. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, Mr. Roberts. Helena met the lawyer's challenging gaze steadily. Yes, I was falsely accused. After your client stole the brooch and left town, suspicion fell on me as the newest member of the household. And convenient for you to now point the finger at my client, isn't it? Shifting blame to save yourself? No, sir, Helena replied calmly. I was fully exonerated when Marshal Nash recovered the stolen brooch from your client's possession. along with items taken from other households where Mr. Reed had presented himself as a traveling salesman. Roberts tried several more lines of attack, attempting to confuse Helena about dates and times, suggesting she had been too busy with her sewing to properly observe Reed, even implying that she might have been attracted to the handsome salesman and was now retaliating for a rebuffed advance. Through it all, Helena remained composed, answering truthfully and directly, refusing to be provoked or flustered. She could feel Samuel's supportive gaze from the audience, lending her strength. When she was finally dismissed from the stand, Helena returned to her seat beside Samuel, who squeezed her hand briefly in silent support. The trial continued with other witnesses, victims from other towns, the deputies who had helped arrest Reed, and finally Samuel himself, who testified about finding the stolen items in Reed's possession and the thief's attempt to flee when confronted. By late afternoon, both sides had presented their cases, and the jury retired to deliberate. To everyone's surprise, they returned in less than an hour with a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. Judge Harmon sentenced Reed to 15 years in the territorial prison, plus restitution to his victims. As the convicted thief was led away, he cast a venomous glance at Helena and Samuel, but Helena felt only relief. Justice had been served, and her ordeal was truly over. Outside the town hall, in the warm sunshine of the late afternoon, Samuel took both of Helena's hands in his. "You were magnificent in there," he said, his voice warm with pride. "Not a trace of that frightened woman I first saw in the Willow Creek courtroom." Helena smiled up at him. "I had something to be brave for this time, someone who believed in me." Around them, townspeople offered congratulations on the successful prosecution, many stopping to express their admiration for Helena's poised testimony. When the crowd finally dispersed, Samuel offered her his arm. "May I walk you home, Miss Zachary?" he asked formally, though his eyes danced with private meaning. "You may, Marshal Nash," Helena replied with equal formality, placing her hand on his arm. As they walked toward Cedar Street, Samuel spoke of practical matters, the paperwork he would need to complete now that the trial was over, the arrangements for Reed's transfer to the territorial prison. But there was an underlying current of anticipation between them, a sense that something significant had shifted with the conclusion of the trial. At the door of her shop, Helena turned to face Samuel. "Would you like to come in? I could make supper." Samuel hesitated, and Helena saw conflict in his eyes. "I'd like that very much," he said finally. "But first, there's something I need to ask you." Helena's heart quickened at his serious tone. "Yes?" Samuel took a deep breath. "With the trial over, your obligation to remain in Silverstone is finished. You could go anywhere now, start fresh in Denver or another larger town where your dressmaking skills might bring you more business, more opportunity." "Is that what you think I should do?" Helena asked, suddenly uncertain. "No," Samuel said quickly, his hands coming up to grasp her upper arms gently. "God, no. But I need to know that if you stay, it's because you want to, not because you feel obligated or trapped." Helena's uncertainty melted away, replaced by a rush of affection for this honorable man who was still, even now, putting her freedom of choice above his own desires. "Samuel," she said softly, reaching up to touch his face, "I'm staying because Silverstone is where I want to be, where I've found a home, a community that values me, work that fulfills me." She paused, her eyes holding his. "And most importantly, where you are." The relief that flooded his features was almost painful to witness. "Helena," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I've been carrying something with me for days now, waiting for the right moment." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch, not unlike the one that had held Mrs. Montgomery's recovered brooch, Helena realized with a start. But when Samuel opened it and tipped the contents into his palm, it was a ring that caught the late afternoon sunlight, a simple gold band set with a single perfect pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my mother's," Samuel explained, his eyes never leaving Helena's face. "My father gave it to her the day they were married. I've kept it safe, waiting for—" He swallowed hard. "Waiting for the woman I would love for the rest of my life." Helena's breath caught in her throat as Samuel took her left hand in his. "Helena Zachary, I love you. I think I began to love you the moment I saw you standing in that courtroom." facing your accusers with dignity despite your fear. Every day since has only deepened that love. His blue eyes were intense with emotion. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Tears of joy sprang to Helena's eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Samuel. I love you, and nothing would make me happier than to be your wife. With fingers that trembled slightly, Samuel slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if made for her, the pearl glowing softly against her skin. Then he drew her close, one hand cradling the back of her head as his lips met hers in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. When they finally parted, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. I have a house, he said, a smile in his voice. On the edge of town, nothing fancy but solid. Room for a garden, maybe. Room for children someday. Helena's heart swelled at the vision he painted. It sounds perfect, she said, though I'll miss my little shop. You don't have to give it up, Samuel assured her. It's only a short walk from the house. You can continue your business as long as you wish. Helena kissed him again, marveling at how completely her life had transformed in the span of a few short weeks. From the terror of false accusation to the joy of true love, it was almost too much to comprehend. Come inside, she said softly. Let me make you supper. We have plans to discuss. Their wedding took place 6 weeks later in the white clapboard church with its new bell, which rang joyously as they emerged as husband and wife. All of Silverstone turned out for the celebration, the townspeople having embraced Helena as one of their own with remarkable speed. Mrs. Holloway wept openly during the ceremony, claiming later that she had known from the first day that the marshal and the seamstress were destined for each other. The widow Jenkins, resplendent in a new dress of Helena's making, declared it the most romantic match the town had ever seen. Even Dr. Collins admitted he had wagered on a spring wedding and lost his bet to the mayor, who had correctly predicted a summer celebration. Helena wore a gown of ivory silk that she had worked on secretly in the evenings, its elegant lines and delicate embroidery showcasing her considerable skill. Samuel, standing tall and handsome in a new black suit, looked at her with such undisguised adoration that several of the town's young ladies sighed audibly during the exchange of vows. The reception was held in the town square, tables laden with food, contributed by every household in Silverstone. There was dancing, laughter, toast to the happiness of the marshal and his bride. As the summer sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the festivities, Samuel drew Helena slightly away from the crowd. "Happy, Mrs. Nash?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Completely," Helena replied, resting her hands on his chest. "And you, Marshal Nash?" "More than I ever thought possible." He kissed her gently, mindful of the many eyes upon them. Ready to go home? Home. The word held such promise now. Together they bid farewell to their guests and climbed into the buggy decorated with ribbons and flowers by the school children. As they drove toward the house that would now be their shared home, Helena leaned against her husband's shoulder, contentment filling her heart. The house was indeed solid and welcoming, with a wide porch and rooms that Helena had already begun to make their own, with simple, tasteful furnishings. Samuel carried her across the threshold, a traditional gesture that made them both laugh with the sheer joy of it. Later, as stars filled the night sky outside their bedroom window, Helena lay in her husband's arms, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I was thinking about the first time I saw you," Helena replied, "striding into that courtroom in Willow Creek. How you looked at me and said, 'Her place is with me,' with such conviction." Samuel's arm tightened around her. "I meant it then, but I didn't fully understand what I was saying. Now I do." He kissed her temple. "Your place is with me, Helena Nash, and mine is with you, for all the days of our lives." "For all the days of our lives," Helena echoed, sealing the promise with a kiss. 1 year later, Helena stood in the doorway of their home, watching as Samuel rode up the path, returning from his daily rounds of Silverstone. The town had continued to grow, with new families arriving regularly, attracted by the community's reputation for safety and prosperity. Samuel's fair but firm leadership was often cited as a primary reason for the town's success. Helena's dressmaking business had flourished as well. She had taken on an apprentice, young Lizzie Thompson, who showed remarkable skill with a needle. This allowed Helena to balance her work with her most important role, that of wife to the Marshal, and, more recently, mother to their infant son. James Samuel Nash, named for both his grandfathers, lay sleeping in his cradle inside the house, his tiny features a perfect blend of his parents. Born just 2 months ago, he had already become the center of their world, his arrival completing their happiness in a way neither had fully anticipated. As Samuel dismounted and secured his horse, his eyes found Helena in the doorway, and the smile that lit his face was still capable of making her heart race. He crossed to her quickly, gathering her in his arms and kissing her with a thoroughness that spoke of undiminished passion. "How are my two favorite people?" he asked when they parted, his hand automatically moving to smooth a strand of golden hair from her face. "Missing you," Helena replied, leading him inside to where their son slept peacefully. "Though this one has been an angel today." Samuel's expression softened as he gazed down at his sleeping son. With one finger, he gently touched the baby's cheek, marveling as he often did at the miracle they had created. "I spoke with Judge Patterson today," he said, as they moved to the kitchen where Helena had supper waiting. "He's retiring from the circuit." Helena glanced up from the stew she was ladling into bowls. "The judge from Willow Creek? The one who presided over my case?" Samuel nodded, taking his seat at the table. "He was passing through on his way to Denver, stopped to pay his respects. He remembered us, of course." "I should think so," Helena said, placing his bowl before him and joining him at the table. "It isn't every day a marshal interrupts a trial to claim a defendant." Samuel took her hand across the table, his thumb brushing over the gold band that now accompanied her engagement ring. "He said something that struck me. He said he'd been a judge for 30 years, seen thousands of cases, but he'd never forgotten the day I walked into his courtroom and announced, 'Her place is with me.'" Helena squeezed his hand. "Nor have I." "He said he knew then that it was more than just a marshal doing his duty." Samuel's blue eyes held hers. "He said he could see it in the way I looked at you, even then." "And how did you look at me?" Helena asked softly. Samuel's gaze was tender, like a man who'd found something he didn't know he was searching for until that moment, like a man who'd discovered the other half of his soul. Helena felt tears gather in her eyes. "Oh, Samuel." "He was right," Samuel said simply. "I didn't understand it then, but from that first moment in the courtroom, seeing you stand so brave despite your fear, something in me knew your place was with me, and mine with you." From the cradle came a small sound as James began to stir. Helena rose to attend to him, lifting the infant and bringing him to his father. Samuel took his son with practiced ease, cradling him against his broad chest with a tenderness that never failed to move Helena. As she watched her husband with their child, Helena's heart overflowed with gratitude for the twisted path that had led her here to this man, this home, this life. From the darkest moment of false accusation had come the brightest possible future. "I love you," she said, resting her hand on Samuel's shoulder. "Both of you so very much." Samuel looked up at her, his eyes filled with a depth of emotion that needed no words, but he spoke them anyway, the words that had become their daily affirmation of the miracle they had found together. "Her place is with me," he said softly, "and mine is with her, now and always." As the evening deepened into night, the little family remained together in the warm kitchen of their home, the home they had built with love, with trust, with the unshakable certainty that they belonged together. Outside, Silverstone settled into peaceful slumber, secure in the knowledge that their marshal kept watch. Inside, Helena and Samuel Nash counted their blessings and looked forward to all the days and years that stretched before them, days they would face together, come what may. For Helena had found her true place in the world, not in a courtroom of judgment, but in the heart of a good man who had recognized her worth when others could not. And Samuel had found in Helena not just a wife, but a partner, a strength beside his own, a love that made him more than he had been alone. Their journey had begun with those fateful words spoken in desperation and duty. It would continue for the rest of their lives, deepening and growing with each passing day. Her place was with him, his with her, a truth as simple and as profound as love itself.